Members of Youth Parliament Poppy, Matthew and Jemima had the opportunity to meet with Councillor Aalders to discuss SEND and the changes they would like to see for young people in Suffolk.
So I'm Poppy, I'm from Ipswich, and my priorities are mostly around special education needs children, support for domestic violence and sexual abuse, and getting young people more interested in politics. Matthew?
Yeah, I'm Matthew and I'm from Bury St Edmunds, and my what's the word now?
Manifesto?
Priority.
Yeah, my priorities are around obviously SEND as well, like and political education, and the environment was my last one. Yeah, because that's what I'm most passionate about and what I believe in.
So how did you get involved? Because I know very little about the youth parliament. So how do you get involved in something like this? Because it seems like a great thing. I'd have loved that when I was your age.
So I personally got an email from my school, I don't know about Matthew, about it. It did get delayed this year. So then we had like a little election running, and there was a couple of candidates, and the videos got shown amongst youth groups in the local area of the constituency, and then the youth groups voted on it.
Okay, all right. So you're right. So you had to go through a proper election process, and you were up against other people, and so if people liked what you had to say, they put their hand up or put a cross on a box or whatever else. Right. Okay.
And that comes through to us then, all the applicants we get to review.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Fantastic. And how long can you be in the parliament? Is it a year at a time?
It's a year, yeah. I think it's usually 2 years, but this year it's 1, I believe.
Okay. Right. And it's and so people from all over Suffolk, or just all over Suffolk? Is it where everyone's from? Or?
Well, the Suffolk cabinet is me, Jemima, Matthew and Dea, but obviously it goes across England, and I think it's in Scotland and Wales as well, Jess?
Yeah, and Northern Ireland.
No, and Northern Ireland.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm also conscious of the fact that actually Jemima, you're there, or you're there. But we didn't ask you what are your priorities?
My priorities are mainly supporting people with disabilities and giving them support, alongside with the environment, especially climate change. Specifically, like, it's gotten so hot over the summer, it's just going to keep getting hotter. And equal rights for everyone, no matter their race, their ethnicity, their gender identity, their sexual orientation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. All right. So when you talk about, if we talk about SEND for a minute. So what do you think about the SEND system? What are the things that you've got concerns about?
Matthew, do you
Well,
like to
yeah, I think that our SEND we're not up to scratch of what they need and the needs that they need to be given, because I think a lot of students who are affected by it aren't given the support they need, and I think we're diagnosed too late. We need to start prioritising people's diagnosis earlier and when they're in primary school, because there's less stigma around it when you're younger, because people don't know as much. But when you get to high school, when I was diagnosed, a lot of people know a lot more about it, and they call you a lot of unnice things. But if you go around it, then everyone will accept it, because that's just what you're going around.
Yeah. Can I chip in here? I was speaking the other day, I was doing an interview for the 1473 at the local news site, and what I spoke about there was that I think there's a big gap. We have provisions for SEND children at one side of SEND, and then on the other side of the spectrum we just have normal mainstream schools. But what about the children that don't fit necessarily into either category, that mainstream school or a SEND provision isn't suitable for? I feel like there's a big gap there, and a lot of children with special educational needs are struggling and out of provision instead of being in school.
Sure. And Jemima, what do you think about that? Have you got anything you would like to add? And then because I'm just thinking about what I can say.
I think that mainly it just needs, if someone needs support, I think they need to be properly supported, like ILSPs, and maybe teaching me a bit more education on how they can treat people that need things like ILSPs, breathing space cards, etc.
Okay, so I won't profess to be an expert in SEND, but I think that certainly some of the things that I've been thinking about are a bit really in similar lines to what you were suggesting there, Poppy, and yourself there. I think that there's something about, so whether you've got specialist provision and then you've got kind of the sort of the mainstream provision. And what I'm wondering about is that, is it right that so someone who needs to be in the specialist provision for a period of time, but doesn't need to be in there for a year, they might only need to be in there for a few months to kind of resolve if they've got a particular issue going on, or they need to sort of get up to speed, if you like, with kind of mainstream education and then go back into the mainstream system. But that people would move between the two on a needs basis, so that if someone does go into mainstream and they become a bit more sort of overwhelmed by whatever's happening, or they need more specialist support, that they can go back into somewhere. And if those buildings were close together, or the classrooms or whatever are close together, then people can still be part of the whole. They don't have to they maybe don't feel isolated or something along those lines. And that's just what we've kind of been thinking about at the moment, because we've got a large sort of building program that's going to take place over the next few years. And it's really kind of what sorts of buildings need to be made, what kind of improvements need to be made within schools to help, like we were talking about earlier on, about the either early diagnosis, but also how do you support people once they've got a diagnosis or need some type of support. How do you allow people to move really with more flexibility between the mainstream and specialist provision? Because the other thing that I think a lot about is about it's called sort of vocational training as such, but sometimes for a lot of people, and certainly when I was in school a million years ago, not everything was kind of geared up towards the academic. So there was a lot more sort of practical stuff on there. You had a lot more kind of practical opportunities to develop your skills, and I'm wondering about whether, and I'm not saying that what we did back in the 80s was necessarily completely right for certain sections of for young people, but I kind of wonder if we just keep pushing everybody into academia, and actually some people just really, that's just not their thing. That if there was some more vocational skills-based and maybe even life skill-based education to help people to learn about how to function healthily in the current society, because you've all mentioned kind of quite some really kind of huge kind of global issues, but all those things now that we've all got smartphones come kind of go right into our eyeballs, and for a lot of people it's very difficult to feel what can I do and how can I cope with all of this stuff when I'm also trying to manage all these other things that are going on in my life, whether it's from family relationships or personal relationships or just whatever's going on in your mind as a teenager in today's Britain. So I wonder about that, about how do we help people do more vocational things, and rather than just pushing people into academic, right, I want to go to university, and for a lot of people that doesn't necessarily work. So I wonder about all of these different parts and whether that does help people who are with special educational needs and disabilities. And I wonder whether that helps, whether something like that would help. And I know that there's a lot of kind of conversations going on around that, but it's as you can imagine, it's a very big ship to turn around. So I think that but I like what you're saying, because I think that there has definitely got to be something about early diagnosis and about helping people much earlier, so that there isn't, because I think actually if you do that in earlier years, it actually costs society less in later years, because actually if you've got people with good support, hopefully with the right support that they need, then they will be able to function and contribute at a much higher level than maybe they could do if their diagnosis is very late and education has already been so disrupted that they're really struggling might just find it very difficult to catch up, for the want of a better expression. I'm not sure that really answers your question, but what I'm saying is there's a lot of kind of, certainly we certainly think about it, I certainly think about that quite a lot, looking at the system from a very new perspective, because I'm relatively new to it. But yeah, I think there's something there, because there's clearly a huge demand, and I'm not sure if we can we've got the resources to match every demand, but actually by targeting certain things or making things easier for people, that might also help have what resources we have got. We're able to spread those resources a bit better and a bit more, and a bit more effectively for the broader pupil group.
Can I just add to what you said there? You were saying about students going in and out of mainstream schools and like schools mid-percent.
So more like classrooms really, rather than the school. So if the buildings are close together or there's better resources within the school itself, so that there's more movement between the two. But yeah.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is that my school had a school attached to it, so then that kind of allowed them to feel more included. And
Oh, okay.
so they're not felt as isolated, you know what I mean? So they're not felt like they're different, and they feel like they're all together because they're joined with our school, and it's all the same thing, like same teachers, same everything. They've just got different like needs. Obviously, they'll have some different teachers that specialise in like dealing with what they need and their needs. So then I think that's a better idea because then they still feel included. They don't feel any more different than everyone else. They're still everyone, but they still get the help they need without feeling that way.
Oh, definitely. Well, I'm really pleased you said that because I mean that's to me there is something about feeling part of something and not feeling excluded or or on the edge of things. So that's really encouraging. I'm glad that happened. Are you allowed to say which school you went to?
Yeah, Civil Andrews Academy.
And whereabouts is that?
That's in Bury St.
Bury St. Edmunds. Right. That's up from Bury. So it's obviously a great school. I think the other thing, you were talking about as well, Poppy, you were saying about domestic abuse, and I spent most of my career was in treating people with drug and alcohol issues. But I trained as a psychiatric nurse, so I was a registered mental nurse as it was at the time, so mental health. So, and this was in some of the sort of large hospitals around the counties in Ipswich and over at another place called St Audrey's, which now doesn't exist anymore over in Woodbridge. But I came out of that and I worked in drug addiction for a long time, and domestic abuse is right the way through that. And I recently spent some time working in a domestic abuse centre in Colchester, delivering a drug treatment programme for the women there. And so for me, I see, there's been a lot of kind of advances in things that we do, but the level, the prevalence and the level of domestic abuse hasn't really sort of shifted, I don't think.
Yeah, actually I'd say that I think it's gotten worse, especially with society nowadays. I think people have nowhere to go, and I think that's a big problem, and I don't think that's being like advertised like support networks for victims.
Yeah, I think you're right. I wonder I think people are maybe a little more comfortable talking about it, or maybe there's a bit more awareness about where to go to report those things, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, obviously you can report it to the police, but it's whether victims feel comfortable doing so, especially considering the lack of prosecutions for rape and domestic violence cases and how the criminal justice system repetitively fails young women specifically.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think that there is a huge disparity between between the numbers that are reported and then convictions at the end of it. And I often certainly saw in my experience, certainly my experience of working in the drug world, I don't think I ever could recall meeting a woman who went through the drug treatment system who hadn't been abused in some way, shape or form. And similarly for a lot of men, not in the same numbers, but there was a lot of abuse there for men as well, but particularly for women. One of my daughters worked in the Foreign Office, and she was working on sexual violence in war zones, and trying to work with the UN in trying to reduce that. And it's all part of the same conversation. The abuse and particularly sexual violence against women is kind of in every continent, every walk of life. And I think that there's a huge, and you're right to highlight, there's a huge disparity between the kind of numbers of people that come forward and then the level of prosecutions for all sorts of reasons. Some could say, well, that could be a fairly valid reason, but I think a lot of them is pretty spurious, really. It seems to be a lot of, I would say, that's really just got a lot of clever people arguing over, trying to disprove an obvious statement, and sometimes they're successful in that, and I find that particularly very difficult, particularly for women who want to come forward, and the length of time it takes as well to get a prosecution. Things can be hanging over them for a long time, and again, that's very difficult. When I was working down in Colchester, there was a lot of women there that were going through various prosecutions, and it was very interesting to see just really how time really kind of becomes a really prohibitive factor. So the longer someone's sitting with this, the more and more they're thinking, oh, can I be bothered to keep going through with this, reliving these things, or being challenged all the time about the statements that have been made and those sorts of things, and that became very difficult. They did it with a lot of support, but it's still very difficult. And if you haven't got a high level of support, I can see it's extremely difficult for a woman to go through the whole prosecution process. The trauma you've been through, to unpick those and be able to live your life hopefully in a way more of your freer from that trauma at the end of it. Yeah, I think there may well be. I think there might be quite a lot of cases, but it's successful convictions. I think is that there's three stages. There's a number of people who report the incidents, then there's the court, and then there's successful convictions, and that's a diminishing number. Hopefully I don't know what the courts are doing about it. I'm pretty sure, I would like to think that they're focused on that, because it is a huge problem. You're right. I mean, do you think that, is there a role for sort of, I'd say victim support in some way, a more specialist victim support that can be alongside somebody as they go through that journey?
We have quite a few places. We have Brave Futures in Ipswich, which is a charity that supports victims of sexual abuse during childhood, around to about 19 years old, which are really good. But I think promotion is something that it lacks. I think it needs to people wouldn't know what it was unless you were looking for it. And I feel like it's quite daunting to actually get to the stage you have to want support, which can be very scary. Another thing, I'm actually on a panel board for Brave Futures that we've spoken about is police treatment to victims. It's sometimes completely inappropriate.
Oh, right.
And especially when dealing with victims who are children, police officers speak to them in the same way they would an adult, when actually they are just a child. I've heard about people being shamed for their stories, being biasly not believed, being spoken to in inappropriate ways. And we've had a lot of it in our police force in Ipswich, which is completely unacceptable.
So what are you able to do? Anything? Can you go to the Police and Crime Commissioner with those findings at all? Do you have any dealings? I don't know if you have any dealings with. I've never heard of Brave Futures. It's not really. It's a very interesting thing. That's good that it's
They
around.
come in Bury as well, actually.
Good. I haven't heard of that. I don't profess to know everything.
Yeah.
But I think that, and so, well, maybe, and there's definitely a role in there about promotion.
I think that's a big factor. Especially, I feel like it should be promoted maybe in safe spaces in schools, in hospitals, etc.
Yeah, I think so. I'm just having a little think. I mean, I wouldn't mind finding out a bit more about that myself. I'll give you my details, and then I can come and have a look in Bury. But I lived in Ipswich for 20 years or so. And when some of the work I used to do was county-wide, and so it'd be good to kind of see what's happening. But I'm wondering if there's anything you can do with the Police and Crime Commissioner and his team in relation to some of the training maybe that happens with police, because I know sometimes you read in the papers.
I think that would be a really good idea actually, and that's something that I'm currently campaigning for amongst the board, which we're all in agreement that we'd like to do that.
Yeah.
Another thing that we'd spoken about is the police wearing body cameras when they speak to victims, especially when they deliver the news. If the case will be going to court or not, it's all filmed on camera, which is a very vulnerable and potentially devastating moment for the victims, which is something that we're currently working on. What do you think of that?
Well, that would be a pretty challenging problem. The reason why police have body cameras is to make sure that they have, that as much as the victim is protected, that they're protected.
They're not police officers though.
Oh, so the
They
people
send
that,
out a
so,
specific team of people, but
okay.
they're cameraed up.
Oh right. So are they doing that because it's part of the evidence or something like that? I don't know.
I don't really know, to be honest. I just don't think it's appropriate to be filming victims because they're not the threat. They are not the criminal.
It would certainly be pretty off-putting if you're particularly if you're telling somebody some bad news. You're actually being filmed at the time you're hearing this bad news.
Yeah, it's like potentially the most devastating moments of their lives.
For sure. It might be worth finding out, maybe we could do maybe part of the inquiry to the PCC. What's the context? Why do they do that? Why do they take those cameras? There may be a reasonable explanation, and you might, well, actually, okay, well, now I know that, it's fine, but it might be actually, well, no, it still doesn't make any sense, so, so at least then you've got somewhere to start with. So so I'm guessing that you've never met the police crime commissioner.
No, I'm yet to.
Well, maybe we should. Maybe that's a definite kind of an option, something to do. I'm more than happy to write, because I think it's these things only change through conversations. And if he doesn't know what, I don't know, his team isn't aware of the work that Brave Futures that does, and those types of things, then and that personal experience of people, then I think that's the way you kind of get some shift. There may be opportunities then to talk to the specialists who deliver some of the training, or those people that are involved, the officers that are involved in the work. That there might be things that they can take on board and be able to action fairly quickly, or at least provide the context so that there's a bit of a better understanding as to why things happen in the way that they do.
That would be useful if you could make some introductions or
Yeah,
I'm
I'm more than happy to write to. I can write to Tim Parsmore. That wouldn't be a problem at all. So, what are my priorities? Well, I think the kind of headline priority is for us, and particularly for children's services. There's several things. We want to make sure that the services that we've got are good. We want to make sure that they're delivered in the right way to people in the most effective way. We want to make sure. I do a lot of work around. We do a lot of work around youth justice and looked after children, those sorts of things, as well as broader children's services in terms of whether it's mental health, but obviously schools and SEND is a big part of that. So it is an enormous. It's the second largest directorate portfolio directorate in the county council. I'd argue it's the most important one, because if we get things right when people are young, then we don't have all the issues that people experience when they're adults, certainly far less. And unfortunately, overriding so much of this is finance. There is a very limited pot of money, and we have to be really careful about the kind of changes that we make. We make sure that they've got to be the most sort of cost-effective apart from anything else. Until the day arrives when the government is sending us more money than we know what to do with, we've always got to be very conscious of the fact that we can't necessarily make huge commitments to all sorts of different projects. We have to be really focused on what we do. However, that aside, there is a really good, what I have seen in my time here since May is that there was a really excellent team of people that seems to be very well engaged with a lot of the services, with the people that are receiving the services. Of course, there are things that can be improved, but I think on the whole, the direction of travel, for want of a better expression, is very positive. And certainly around SEN, there's been a lot of improvements around that. The time it takes for someone to be seen, to get an ECP is, that's reducing. There's a far greater percentage of people being seen now within the prescribed 20 weeks, which is a long time, but equally there's a lot of people to be seen. I think the numbers have gone up about 3,000 in the last year, so there's an awful lot of people being seen. And so for priorities, I want to make sure that those improvements continue. The builds that we're talking about in terms of special educational needs provision, so the building of new or improving the facilities that are currently on site in the various schools, that all happens and happens in a very effective way. And I think that hopefully within those schools there'll be a good degree of input from the pupils and the parents and the staff about what's going to be the most effective way to improve the physical structure, so that we can then help to, hopefully that will then lead to improvements within the learning environment as well, because I think in a lot of places there's a lot of things that aren't maybe quite so good, or could certainly be improved, or have been around for a long time and certainly need kind of upgrading and those sorts of things. And I think one of the other things that we're doing and that the team are doing a lot of work on is also looking at, in terms of the criminal justice system, about looking at sort of reparations rather than custodial sentences, and how do we get more into sort of community-focused reparations and family-focused reparations rather than just people going into custodial settings. And there's
what would that be regarding? What types of crimes?
So there won't be the most serious crimes. So it won't be for kind of your sort of murders and stabbings and sexual assaults, rapes, those sorts of things. But lower level offending, where a non-custodial intervention can deliver a far greater outcome.
Can we have some examples of like what crimes it could be?
Yeah, sure. So let's say that it's antisocial behaviour, things like this, and it might be a bit of criminal damage, those sorts of things. So something that could, and it might be something that's quite persistent, or it might be some persistent shoplifting or something along those lines. If we work with the young person who's committing the offences, if they start to meet the victims, or they have an understanding of what their impact has been on someone, and it could even be from sort of domestic burglaries as well. If you start to understand actually there is a victim at the end of this, or this bit of criminal damage, I didn't think didn't affect anybody, but actually we've got stories of people that have then been injured as a consequence. And so people do things without thinking about the consequences. And so if you then start to bring in that, well, actually these are the consequences of your actions, and that's done in an educational way and a supportive way, so that it helps that person understand actually when I do those things there is a definite impact. Equally, they can also understand there is a definite impact on my future life outcomes as well. And there's been a huge amount of work done, and there's a lot of success in Suffolk in that regard. And I've been very impressed in looking at the numbers of families that have been, and victims that have been, and families that have been able to meet with the perpetrator and actually come to a decent sort of resolution, and for them, the perpetrator to understand the impact, and the families to be able to sort of share their experience, and that sort of stuff really seems to be paying off, I think, and I'm really interested in those sorts of things. I think that's a much better way. Again, a million years ago, they would do things like what we used to call the short, sharp shock. So minor offences, you'd end up in a youth offending institute or wherever else. It didn't really make any difference. So I'm really interested in kind of what other ways are there that we can see a much better outcomes, because I think people do all sorts of things when they're young, and we don't need to suffer the consequences of that. They don't need to suffer the consequences of that over their lifespan. Most of us, thankfully, make mistakes and we move on. And so that's really kind of what I'm keen to sort of see. And I'd like to say there's a really great team of people doing that work right across the country.
Thank you to Councillor Simon Aalders for taking the time and listening to the Suffolk MYP's experiences, ideas and ambitions for a more inclusive future.